Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Go Farther series here on the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. It's another episode in our Go Farther series, and this episode is called Make Hard Things Routine and Do the Work. Make hard things routine and do the work. Before I dive in, if you're happen to be watching this on YouTube, you'll notice I'm wearing my Western States Endurance Run t-shirt here in the ultra running world that I tend to step in and out of. Big week in the mountains here in Northern California. So this week is the week of the Western States 100, which is which is the oldest and one of the most prestigious 100-mile ultra marathons. A race I've done a couple of years ago, and a race that usually each year somewhere between 6 to 8 thousand people try to get one of the 300 spots available in this race via lottery or exemptions or some other way. Just one of those races everybody wants to do. It's beautiful. It starts up in Olympic Valley, formerly known as Squaw Valley, now called Palisades, the ski resort. Starts up there, goes up and over the peak of the ski resort at around 8,900 feet, and then starts to work its way up and down, eventually down into Auburn, California, through, we call it the high country for the first 30 miles, which is above about 7,000 feet. So it's elevation, but not super, super high. And then the next kind of third of the race goes from the high country through what was called the canyons, which are up and down mountains that usually middle of the day can be anywhere between 90 and 105 degrees. So going up and down in these exposed areas isn't terribly fun. And then the last third of the race winds its way from a place called Forest Hill, which is about 3,000 feet elevation, down to Auburn, which is about 1,000 feet. So the last third of the race is, I guess you could call it the easy part of the race, except that you've already run 63 miles, 65 miles by the time you get to Forest Hill. So you've also got, it's usually night at that point for 95% of the runners. So you're working on headlamps and dusty trails and all those kinds of things. So I'm excited for this weekend. One, because it's just a fun week in the ultra running world where people are talking and lots of months of training for a lot of friends that are either doing the race or participating in some way. For me personally, I'm going to be doing two things at the race. Number one, I'm volunteering at an aid station. So here in Davis, California, we have a running club, and our running club runs an aid station at mile 65, 66. So that's a fun thing to do during the day. So I run the day shift there, which is fun because that means is we get to see all of the lead runners come through. So usually starting around 3 o'clock or so in the afternoon is when we see the lead runners. These are the pros, the professionals. These are the people that run like gazelles and remarkably are like literally running 8, 9 minute mile pace for 100 miles up and down mountains. It's just incredible to watch these athletes come through, both men and the women. So usually that runs through about 7 p.m. And then from there, I'm going to be pacing an international runner. So my friend Kelly and I are good friends and good trail running buddies. So he and I are teaming up to pace an international runner from Hong Kong. Neither of us know this guy. We just know that he's coming in from Hong Kong, and there's a woman that is organizing his race for him. So he's flying over. He sent over all of his supplies. She found a person to run crew for him to meet him at different aid stations, and then Kelly's going to pace him from Forest Hill down to a place called the River. So roughly mile like 62, 63, whatever that is at Forest Hill, down to about mile 77, 78, a place called the River, Rucky Chuck, it is called. Then that's where I pick up. We cross the river and then get to the finish. So I'm pacing the last 22 miles. So this runner wants to finish in under 24 hours, which I can appreciate. That was my goal for the race. And so with any luck, if he's on time and makes it to the river, I should see him around 11 p.m. So that's where I'll start running, running 22 miles, get into the finish before 5 a.m. on Sunday morning. So we want to hit the finish line by 4:59, 59 or better, which again, I can fully appreciate that goal. So hopefully he's number one, hopefully he makes it that far. Always a chance of a DNF for different reasons. And especially, I've been fortunate enough to be able to run that race and run the course, many different parts of the course several times. So I know what to expect. I know what the course is like. I know what the heat can be like. Whereas this guy's coming in from Hong Kong, I don't know what kind of training he's had in the mountains. And certainly first time in the course can be really difficult, just getting used to the terrain and those sorts of things. So hopefully he will, if he gets it to Forest Hill, I know Kelly's going to get him to the river. No doubts about that. And if he can get him to the river, I can get him home to the finish line. So that's the plan. So the other reason this week is exciting is that this pacing I'm doing is a bit of a training run for me because I'm coming up close to my own ultra coming up on July the 12th. So I'm doing 100K, so 63 miles. And so I've been training really hard this last month or so. I mean, I've been training hard all year, but this will get us into the make hard things routine topic. But these last 3 weeks have been really, really good training for me, having done some long miles every weekend in some heat and doing some vertical climbing up and down. Had a really good run on Saturday. So I'm feeling excited that I'm going to start pacing this guy at 11 p.m. because that happens to be the start time of my race, because my race is going to be out in Finland, remarkably enough. And so they run this race. Usually races start at 5 a.m., 6 a.m., and then you run all day and then you run through the night into the next morning. This particular race, because it's Finland in the summer and there's perpetual daylight, the race starts at 11 p.m. So I'll be running through technically the night, even though it's going to be sun the entire way, or at least light the entire way, and then hopefully finishing by about 1 or 2 in the afternoon the next day. So it'd be good for me to start running at 11 p.m. because it will exactly mimic what I have to expect on my day. Plus, I'm going to be a little bit tired from being out there all day working on the aid station. So hopefully somewhere in there, I'll get a nap, an hour or two of sleep to reset, recharge. At his pace, hopefully he won't be going too fast. I mean, my job is just get him to the finish. So we'll probably going like 12, 13, 14-minute miles for those last, as a pace for those last 22 miles. So it shouldn't be something I can handle. But of course, like if this guy's relying on me to get him to the finish, especially under 24 hours, and he's come all the way from Hong Kong, a little bit of pressure there. So don't want to let him down. So I want to be rested and ready for that. So anyway, big week here in the ultra running world, and I'm sure it's also a big week and coming up to the end of Q2 for you and your business. So I think it's a good time to dig into today's episode, which is make hard things routine. Do the work. All right, well, let's talk about why this topic. Why this topic? Well, as we're talking about all the time here with the Go Farther series, the whole goal here is we want to do more. We want to be happy. We want to surprise ourselves. And that's what allows us to feel this sense of going farther, whether that's farther distance-wise in the ultra running world or just metaphorically with our life, with our business, with our relationships, the people around us. And so the reason that this topic is important, I think, is number one, we know the work that we're going to do is going to be hard. If we want to do more, if we want to be happy, we want to surprise ourselves, we want to go farther, it's going to be hard, right? Anything that's worth doing is going to be difficult to do. And along the way, we know we're going to hit obstacles, we're going to hit walls, we're going to hit obstructions, and we're going to get frustrated. We're going to get fatigued. We're going to get tired. We're going to get annoyed. All of those obstacles and obstructions and the difficulty is, part of the deal whenever you're doing hard things. And underneath all that, at least for me, whenever I'm out there and I'm doing stuff that's hard and I hit these obstacles and obstructions and I get fatigued and I get frustrated, I always ask, like, I sort of have this underlying fear, like, am I going to break through the next level? Am I going to be able to get through this next upper limit that I keep hitting here, this ceiling that I seem to hit, to get to the place where I really want to go if I want to go farther? And so where we want to be is a place where we can just keep moving forward. We can make sure that even if we get a little bit off track or a little bit off course, that we can find our way back to the path forward. And we want to break sure that we're breaking through those upper limits. And breaking through those upper limits doesn't have to be, I think about this imagery of somebody like shattering glass with a sledgehammer. And it's this big, huge like moment where we like break through the upper limit. But usually breaking through the upper limit is more like a nudge. It's more like, oh, okay, I'm just going to push this boundary a little bit further down the track. I'm going to push a little farther with my running. I'm going to push a little faster. I'm going to push a little bit more with sales if it's a business, or I'm going to push a little bit more with the way that we're managing our team or holding them accountable. It's not usually one of those things where we just sledgehammer that upper limit and then all of a sudden we just break through and now we're just floating into the sky. And so what that means is really like making sure that we are doing those hard things and making those hard things routine such that when we're making the hard things routine, then they become easier for us mentally, physically, psychologically, which then allows us to break through those upper limits. So let me begin with a couple of examples from training appropriately, since I started the episode talking so specifically about trail running. So this idea of, train, a part of it, like doing hard things, making hard things routine, I think of it sometimes as like training harder than you race, training harder than you race. So if I'm thinking about my training program over the course of a week or over the course of a month, I'm thinking about like, what can I do that's going to stack the effort up such that I'm actually going to feel tired when I'm out there starting a run. So there's a lot of benefit to stacking up workouts where you're doing multiple days in a row of running. Maybe you're doing some speed work, then maybe you're doing some distance, and then maybe I'll do some weight training, deadlifts or squats or something like that, so that my legs are tired, such that when I go out for a long run on a Saturday, maybe it's a 20-mile or 25-mile trail run with lots of up and down, vertical, along with some heat training. I want that long run to feel hard. I don't want to go out there and just feel like, oh, I feel fresh as a daisy, because I know that it's only, in some sense, a 20 or 25-mile run. And most race days, you're going to feel fresh when you start because you're like, for me, I taper down starting 2 to 3 weeks out. So reducing my mileage, reducing my climbing, making sure I'm working on mobility, making sure I'm getting more rest, drinking more water, so that start of the race, I'm feeling great. And so if those training runs are only mimicking how I feel at the start of a race, what's going to be missing is that by the time I finish the training run at mile 20 or 25, yeah, I'm going to be tired and I'm going to start to feel it in my legs, but it doesn't help me to train for the last 25 or the last 35 or the last 75 miles of a race. And so I think about like, how do I train harder than I race? And so for me, one example this year really kind of was just kickstarting my training back on January 1. And so one of the things I decided to do in January of this year, I set a goal for myself that I was going to do 50 workouts in the 31 days of January, 50 workouts in 31 days. Now, what that means, obviously, from a math standpoint, is that I'm going to be doing at least more than a handful of days where I'm going to be doubling up. So it could be that I went to a jujitsu class and then in the evening and in the morning I went for a run. Or maybe I went for a swim in the morning and then a run in the afternoon. Or I did some lifting in the morning and then jujitsu in at night, or jujitsu in the morning and swimming in the afternoon, just to get to those 50. And on top of that, I told myself no rest days. So I was going to exercise every day throughout January, which I ended up doing throughout the course of this year. So I've now exercised every single day this year. It's now June 25th, except for one day where I purposely took a rest day ahead of a race that I did a couple weeks ago as part of my training. So this idea of like, how do I make hard things routine? I'm not ever going to be always doing 2-a-day workouts and exercising every single day forever and doing hard training every single day. It doesn't make sense, right? It's not good for your body. It's not going to allow you to rest and recover. You're going to end up redlining, burning out, injuring yourself. But in these shorter spurts, in this case, 31 days, it was an opportunity for me to break through some upper limits that I was feeling at the end of 2024 or 23. So at the end of last year, going into Thanksgiving, going into Christmas, while I did a 100K ultra marathon in October, and I felt good, and I had a decent race. It wasn't a great race, but I finished it, and I was certainly fit and physically capable of doing that race. I didn't feel this overwhelming sense like, man, I was really locked in for this race and I was really fit. And if I look back at my training, and even during my training, I told myself I wasn't going to train, at the top level for this race. I was going to let myself kind of eat what I wanted to eat. I was going to let myself have a beer on the weekend if I wanted to have a beer on the weekend. I wasn't going to overstress about this race. I knew all of the things I needed to do to get ready to have the ability to finish that 100K race back in October. But this year, looking ahead, I was like, you know what? I could do better. I need to do better. And it's not just physically better. I need to do better psychologically with keeping myself disciplined around my diet. I need to do better mentally to be stronger and be able to get myself going to do workouts I didn't want to do instead of slouching off. I wanted to make sure that mentally I was doing the workouts I prescribed for myself and not letting myself off easy and saying, well, I said I was going to do 20 miles, but I'm only going to do 15 today. And that's fine because 15 is still really good. And so this idea of like training harder than your race, it's like building the habits and the expectations mentally, psychologically, physically, emotionally, even environmentally, making sure that the people around me know that, hey, I'm in training mode. And what that means is I need to communicate with you to let you know what's going on, meaning my wife and my son in particular. And I also want them to be able to support me and hold me accountable to say, hey, like, hey, aren't you going for a training run this Saturday? Oh, yes, I am. Thanks for making sure I get that on the calendar. So that's part of training harder than your race is kind of like for me is stacking up these workouts or putting together these months of very difficult training. When I look at this last month in particular, what I was talking about having a really good training month, 3 weeks ago, I did a trail marathon race. So 26.2 mile race in the hills though. So you're doing running in the hills. So lots of up and down. I think there's about 6,000 feet of vertical climbing up and down. Some big climbs and a lot of little climbs up and down for the 26.2 miles. And when I look at the race I'm training for, the 100K I'm doing in July, the total elevation vertical up and down is about 12,000 feet. So when I say train harder than your race, the race that I did was 26.2 miles, which is less than half the distance. But the vertical that I did was exactly half. So I'm thinking about, well, how do I make sure that I'm training for vertical that's more difficult than the race is going to be? This past weekend, I did another training run on my own. I went out to the Sierra Nevadas. Trail is about an hour from here, and I went up and down. I climbed about 6,800 feet, so almost 7,000 feet of elevation climbing up and down, up and down. I did that in 90-degree heat. I did it in exposed where lots of sun. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of forest fires out there, so many of the places that used to be tree covered are now completely exposed in the sun. And I happened to do another 26.2 run, just the trail that I set out for myself, starting from Forest Hill out to this one place and back. That is to also be 26.2 miles. And in that climbing, so 26.2 miles, I did 6,800 feet of climbing in heat, knowing that this race that I'm doing in Finland, again, is only 12,000 feet of vertical over 63 miles. And in checking the weather, which is beautiful, it's only going to be like 65 degrees. I mean, that's summertime in Finland. And so I know that I'm training harder than I'm going to have to race by going out in the heat, going out and doing more elevation, going out in exposed environments, and doing that training run after stacking up multiple days in a row. And then I followed that training run on Saturday that I just did on Sunday morning. I get up and I go to the garage and I do a heavy lifting day where I'm doing deadlifts and pull-ups and one-arm pulls to put a lot of stress on my body after that long run. Then I make Monday and Tuesday recovery days for myself. So this idea of like stacking this up is what really allows you to kind of hit these peak levels. And so what was really like as I wrap up this sort of thinking around training harder than your race, when I look at I use this app called Strava. So any of you that are maybe doing some running or cycling or whatever, it's a really wonderful app because it just tracks your distances, tracks your times, tracks where you go. You can also follow your friends. The really nice thing about Strava that I love is that it will also segment out how you're doing along different parts of your run. When you do the same run over and over, it will tell you how did you do today versus last week. And so in this training run that I did out in the Sierra Nevadas, there's certain segments of that run from Forest Hill up to the top of what's called Deadwood. And that's a roughly like 12-mile run of that first part of the first part of my run. So you go down from Forest Hill into Volcano Creek, and then you go back up to Michigan Bluff, and then you go down to El Dorado, and then you go up to Deadwood. And so when I looked at my time just for that one segment of about 12 miles, it turns out that I had a personal record. So of all of the times I've been out there and all of the times I've done that trail, even when I was training for the Western States race in 2021, that time that I put in on this past Saturday was my best time ever. And other segments of that run that I've done many times in the past, when I look at Strava, it told me it was like my second fastest time, my third fastest time. And a lot of those times were only off by a minute or less compared to when I was at peak fitness. And so the reason I like doing that is that it allows me to look back and see this is the progress that I've made by constantly training hard, by training harder than I would race, by putting myself in a situation where I had to run a race, 26.2 miles a couple weeks ago, with lots of elevation in some heat in the exposed, getting myself ready to then do this big training run. And then comparing that to my times past, it makes me look at where I am fitness wise and know, wow, the training is paying off. The fact that I'm training harder than I would normally race and I'm putting in the work, I'm doing the work every week in order to prepare to step up every week with mileage, every week with training, every week with strength, every week with recovery, every week with diet, every week with sleep. Over time, as you're doing that work, it starts to compound. And now I have a high level of confidence, not just for the pacing duties that I'm going to do this week for the Hong Kong runner, but in less than 3 weeks, I think it's 16 days from the time I'm recording this podcast is my race day. So now I'm already feeling like I'm ready. I'm ready to go. This last run that I'm going to do this weekend is pacing is really just fine tuning. It's like a dress rehearsal for myself to get like that final mental preparation to know that I can start running at 11 p.m., run through the night, feel good for those 22 miles, and know that I'm going to step to that starting line in 16 days and feel like I should have the confidence that I deserve to have because I put in the time that I needed to do by training harder than I would otherwise race. So let's talk about some work examples here. When we're talking about like how do we take this metaphor of training harder than you race in the workplace, and there's a couple things that come to mind for me is where we think about like what are the hard things that we have to do that we must do in order to condition ourselves to be a better leader, to be a better entrepreneur, to be a better business leader, to be a better salesperson, to be a better product person. And so one of the things I think about is honest communication. So we talk about like train harder than you race. I think there's opportunities for us every single day from a communication standpoint to push ourselves to be more honest, to be more forthright, to hold people more accountable. So what I mean by that is just honest communication as a leader with your teammates, with your team, making sure that we're clear to them what the expectation is from their performance. Looking for little opportunities throughout the week where we can constructively improve their work because it's easy to lapse into seeing little things in your work where you feel like, oh, that teammate, what they did wasn't ideal. It was pretty good. I wish they would have done better, but I'm not going to bother with it. I'm not going to bother explaining to them what my expectation was or how they can make it better. And we sort of like, just for the ease of it, we just sort of gloss over it. And look, there's plenty of times where we have to accept that good enough is good enough, right? You don't always have to, doesn't always have to be your perfect way. It doesn't always have to be perfect. Perfect is the enemy of done. However, there are lots of opportunities where if we are not careful and we start to let those little things slip, then over time, those little things that we don't correct, that we don't communicate, that we don't set the right expectations and the right metrics and the right performance based outcomes that we want, eventually over time, then the overall performance can start to slip. And so, basically, I think about this as like, how do we hold ourselves and hold our teams to a standard that would be higher than they would otherwise hold themselves? How do I hold myself or my team to a standard that's higher than they would otherwise hold themselves or I would hold myself? And so look for those opportunities for those honest communications. And sometimes it can be hard, right? Because especially in a world where there's remote work and you might have to communicate on Slack or communicate on Teams or communicate on chat or in email, it's easy to skip over it, or it's easy to simply say, "Hey, can you redo this blog post because I think it can be better." Like that's a little bit lazy. The hard thing is to say to collect, say, two or three small instances, and then ask the person at the end of the week, it's like, "Hey, I want to jump on a call to go through a couple things that we worked on this week and some of the output that you had because I had some ideas and some ways I think they can be better." And then you make the time to get on a call, to get on a video call on Zoom or Teams or Google Meet or whatever else. and say, hey, listen, like, first of all, good work this week. Like, we got this blog post done, we got this marketing collateral out, we did this launch, whatever it is. What I want to do is take the opportunity to show you what you did really well and also to show you where I would like to see some improvement or where the company would like to see you do better on those things. And so the reason I say like train harder than your race and how does this relate is because as you're doing this, first of all, it's hard to make the time. First of all, to say, look, I'm really busy. It's Friday. I'm trying to get stuff out for investors, or I'm trying to get stuff out for customers. I'm trying to do all these other team group meetings. I don't really have time to spend 15 or 20 minutes with this one team member to make those corrections, but you have to do it. Like, this is an example of making the time, doing things that are harder than you otherwise want them to be because it's the right thing to do. And more importantly, as you get into the habit and you make this hard thing routine, it becomes easier when later on down the road and you have to make a major correction with someone. Maybe it's not that team member, but another team member. And that big correction might be you have to put them on a performance improvement plan. So look, like over the last 2 months, the work has not been up to standards. Here are the places where I've attempted to correct this and given you specific metrics or outcomes or KPIs. And over the course of these last 2 months, I haven't seen the improvement that's necessary. The company needs this to improve. Therefore, this is your performance improvement plan for the next 30 days. And if we don't hit the metrics in this PIP, then there won't be a spot for you in this company. Now, that's a hard conversation to have. And I've had to have that conversation many times throughout the course of my career, both as an entrepreneur and as a sales leader. However, when you do the small things every week and you make them routine, you make the corrections routine, you make the individual calls routine, it's much easier to have that bigger, harder conversation. And certainly it's even easier. It's never easy. It's just on a relative scale easier if you do need to let someone go. If you need to decide that this team member can no longer be part of the team and you have to have that conversation and say, look, as of today, you're no longer an employee here. That's as hard of a conversation as you might have to have as a business owner. But if you've conditioned yourself by making these small corrections and being the leader, then those harder things become much easier because you've built that up over time. So a second example would be, I'll take maybe a more positive or fun example would be in the sales process. Like this is what we do here at Sales Quality. I coach on sales and I talk about sales process. And one of the hard things to do is the big meeting. I talk about the big meeting all the time. And so this week I'm actually traveling across the country to do a big meeting with a top 5 bank here in the United States. And this is a deal that we've been working on for the last couple of months. And we finally reached a point where they want us to come into the big corporate office and do the big meeting with it's 15 to 20 people that have been invited to this meeting. And these are VPs, SVPs, EVPs, executives, engineering types, architecture people. So it's literally the big meeting, right? And it's difficult to do that big meeting, right? You're like, I got to get on the plane. I got to make sure I'm prepared. I'm going to be nervous. I'm going to be excited. I'm going to be anxious. I want this to go well. It could be a huge deal that's really going to propel our company forward. All of those things are important, and that's a hard thing to do. Well, how do you take this idea of training harder than you race into that meeting? Well, number one is by breaking down the work a little bit by doing a series of what I call pre-calls. So knowing that, hey, this one big meeting is going to be 3 hours on site on a Thursday afternoon, but those 3 hours on site, that probably means I need to budget 30 to 40 hours of time to prepare for that meeting. That's the training. And in that training, what we're doing is doing calls with the attendees ahead of time. We're connecting with them on LinkedIn, researching more and more about the different products and how we could help that particular bank improve their process. Doing all of the little things. It's like doing the training and stacking up the time when it's easy to say, I don't have time, or I'm really busy with other prospecting, or I'm really busy with these other deals. And saying, well, I'm just going to work on the slides on the plane and then in the hotel when I get there, and then it's going to be fine. Well, no, that's not the standard that you want. That's not what's going to help you break through those upper limits that you have and really put this deal over the top and put the company over the top. So training harder than your race in this case is saying, okay, we've set aside that 3 hour on-site meeting. Now I have to work backwards and budget 30 to 40 hours of time over the next 2 to 3 weeks leading up to that meeting and forcing myself to introduce myself to the different people I've never met before, finding ways to get them on a call before I go meet them in person, doing the heavy research around the different product lines and figuring out what their acquisitions have been and figuring out who their competitors are and finding ways that we know that they may not be proficient in ways that they want to be proficient and putting that into a slide and showing them like you're not as good as you want to be. And we know it. Those are all hard things. But the training here is doing all of those little things, doing all of that hard work along the way, and doing the work to prepare and be over prepared so that I know when I go into that 3 hour meeting, there's probably 90% of the things that I've prepared that we'll never talk about and we'll never get to it. But it's in my mind. I know about different business lines. I know about different executives. I know where those people used to work. I know that those people were part of an acquisition 10 years ago into the bank. I know everything that I could possibly know about that situation so that when I get into the meeting, I am so prepared and so confident that the meeting is actually going to feel easy because I've done the work. I've done all of the hard work going into the meeting. I prepared myself. I prepared my teammates. I prepared the slides. I prepared with the executive sponsor on this to know that this meeting is going to go well. And if it is starting to go off the rails a little bit, then I've done the preparation that I can bring it back on track. The last example I would say that means like training harder than you can race is doing things that you may not want to do, but you know are going to be good for your business. And so one of the things that I talk about all the time with our clients is this concept of authority voice. How to use your voice of authority around the problem you solve, around the key issue that your product helps your customers with. How do you teach your market? How do you lead the crusade? How do you be the forefront of this new way of doing things? And the new way is better than the old way. And the way to do that is to start talking and speaking. And sometimes that speaking could be on a webinar, it could be on a virtual lunch and learn, it could be on a panel at a conference, it could be going to an onsite, it could be speaking as a keynote speaker, it could be running your own workshops. And many times those things feel hard because you're putting yourself out there. So how do you get to a place where you're doing the most difficult things, which is maybe becoming that keynote speaker at the conference around the problem you solve? Well, it's by training harder than you race. It's doing the work to run your first webinar, to record podcast episodes, to find ways to be a guest on other people's podcasts, and then preparing and over preparing for each one of those little engagements, such that you're building up this bank of content, this bank of confidence, this bank of information that you can share and tell the story such that you are leading their crusade so that when you do get that opportunity that you've earned to be up on stage on a panel at a conference or to be that keynote speaker, when you've got a room full of 50, 100, or even 1,000 people all listening to you, it doesn't feel scary. It feels natural. And you're the one that's being the leader and you feel comfortable being the leader. That's your race in a sense. That's your big race to be able to be up on stage. And in order to be prepared to run that race that you want to run and to be the leader in front of that big room, you've got to do the work and train harder than you would otherwise race by doing these incremental little things. And each one of those incremental little things is going to be hard work. If you're going to run a 30-minute webinar, it's probably going to take you 10 to 20 hours to prepare for that. And that's going to feel hard. It's like, man, I don't have the time for this. How do I make time? How do I make sure that I'm delivering a good webinar to the people that are coming, or a good lunch and learn, or a good workshop? Or how do I make sure that I'm prepared to be on this panel instead of just getting to the conference the morning of and then showing up on the panel and just winging it? You got to do the work. You got to do the preparation. Train harder than your race such that when you get to those big moments feel natural, you feel confident, and you know you're going to make the most of those opportunities. All right, so let's talk about 5 strategies, as always, that will help you train harder than your race so you can do the work. Strategy number 1, commit. You got to commit to doing the work. There is no other path. There's no hack, there's no shortcuts. I mean, everyone likes to think about there's an easy way to do things or a shortcut to get the same results. Yeah, there are shortcuts and there are ways to get 60, 70, 80% of the results. But to get to the ideal outcome that you really need to get in certain parts of your business, you really need to commit. You can't hack, you can't hire. You have to commit to doing the work and committing to doing the work to train harder than your race. Maybe that means committing to getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning every day, or maybe it's committing to doing one-on-ones with your team members every 2 weeks on a Friday in order to have those very candid conversations about their performance, both good and bad. Maybe it's committing to putting that first webinar or that first speaking hosting engagement that you're going to do on the calendar and committing to doing the work and committing to make sure that that one webinar, even with only 10 people, is going to be the best one that you can do. So none of the hard work can happen. You're not going to be able to psychologically, emotionally, mentally go and do that hard work unless you're ready to do it. And the way you get ready to do is commit to do it so that no matter what happens, you have decided that you're going to do this come hell or high water. The second is to just like when we start, we commit. What I found is then start easy. So we're talking about training harder than you race and do the work. Yes, got to do all those things. The best way to do those things is to start easy. So if I'm doing a workout in the garage on a Sunday morning after running 26 miles, I'm not going to go out there and put hundreds of pounds of weights and then start doing deadlifts right away. The first thing I'm going to do is like fill up my water and get my workout clothes on. Like that actually is where I mentally start my workout because I know once I put my workout gear on, there is no return. I'm not gonna undress and then put other clothes back on once I put my workout clothes on. I'm like, that's step one, easy. Step two, fill up my water bottle. Step three, go to the garage, put on my Vibrams. I work out in Vibrams because they're easier for me to feel like I'm stable when I'm lifting, right? Number four, get the yoga mat out and start stretching and just rolling my back, rolling my calves, rolling my shoulders. Then I might start doing 50 crunches. Like I know I can do 50 crunches anytime. Oh, now my body's like, oh, okay, now we're working out. And then I get up and do a few more stretches. Maybe I do some air squats, nothing but body weight stuff. Now my body's feeling warm. Okay, well, let me go do 10 assisted pull-ups. Okay, now I'm doing that. Now I'm in the routine. Now I'm doing the workout, right? So I didn't start by lifting the heavy weights. I started by doing the easy things. So the strategy for training harder than you race, for doing the work, is simply start easy, block out the time, make the commitment, and then start easy. Number three, find your places. Find your places. In this case, I mean specifically even physical spaces, your environment. So when I think about the ways I've been able to do hard things, like for example, when I wrote my third book, that was a true labor of love. It was really hard. I had the first version done, sent it to the publisher, came back, and I was completely miserable with it. I was like, this is terrible. I have to rewrite the whole freaking book. And the only way I was going to write the whole book again was to commit the time, a couple days a week, and go in the morning, first thing, before I open up Slack, before I open up email, before I open up the computer to do anything other than write. I knew I was going to have to get up and start writing before I had any distractions. And so my place that I did that writing was Phil's Coffee. So here in Davis at Phil's Coffee, 6 o'clock in the morning, it opens up. And so I made the commitment and I made that my place where I could order on their app on the way to Phil's. It takes a 10-minute drive to get downtown. Order on the app so that when I show up, the coffee's ready to go. Pick up the coffee, go to a table, open up my laptop, and I start writing. That was my place to do my writing. So it's psychologically detached from my office as well as physically, of course, detached from my office. So, because when I'm in my office, I might feel compelled to go on LinkedIn and do some prospecting or open up Slack and start answering messages or start working on a presentation. Whereas when I'm in Phil's Coffee, I'm like, Phil's Coffee is my book writing place. So find a place like that. Recently, I found that while I work from home, and I'm generally pretty effective, I found in the afternoons I've been getting distracted. I'm having a hard time, like right around lunch. I do get up early. So by noon, 1 o'clock, I'm starting to feel fatigued mentally, usually calls in the morning or working on presentations to do something else. So physically, I'm tired, you know, I'm also hungry. So I might eat a little lunch, which leads to a change in the chemicals in my body. So now I have to digest that food. My son might be coming back from summer camp or school. The dog who's been napping all morning after the morning walk is now starting to get up and be a little more active and be a distraction. And so what I've discovered is I needed a place to go to do work in the afternoon. And so what I found is a shared workspace here in Davis, and I bought a pass. And now in the afternoons, if I just need to pop over there for 2 hours to really concentrate and not have the distractions of the home environment, then I can now do that. So that has become my place to go when I need to do deep work and concentrate in the afternoon, when I otherwise would not be able to do that here at home. So find a great place for you in order to do certain kinds of work, which will allow you to um, improve and do the hard things. Um, Number four, don't think, just do. And that goes back to the commitment and it goes back to the routine aspect of this. It's just like at 4 a.m., I'm going to get up. And even though it's a Saturday, I'm getting up at 4 a.m., I've got my gear ready to go. I'm going to get in the truck and I'm going to drive out to the hills. And by 6 a.m., I'm going to hit my timer and I'm going to get started with this 26-mile run, period. Like, just don't even think about it. Don't even consider it. The alarm goes off, get out of bed, feet on the floor. Once my feet are on the floor, I know I'm up. I'm not going to let myself down, both physically. I'm not going to let myself back down onto the bed, and I'm not going to let myself down from the commitment that I made. So don't think about it too much. Just go to the trail, do the work, lift the weights. Don't think about it, just do. And then the fifth thing I would say, I think is really important to train harder than you race and to do the work is to track your progress. I think this is so critical. And like I just talked about a little bit earlier, Strava, where I went out with the intention this past Saturday of seeing how well I would do on those different segments. I wanted to see how my fitness compared to 3 years ago when I was training for the Western States 100. How was my time on those climbs? How are my times on those descents? How did I do in the same weather conditions than I did 3 years ago when I knew I was at peak physical shape? And so being able to track that progress and see how I did, I was, fastest time, second fastest time, third fastest time on those segments, made me feel confident, right? And it's the same thing with your work at work. Track your progress. How many touches did you do for rear prospecting? Did you do your 20? Did you do 15? Track those, put them in a spreadsheet, put them in an Evernote file, whatever you need to do. And there are times where you need to stop when it gets hard and look back at the progress and say, wow, okay, I've been doing 20 touches a day on my prospecting, been doing this every single day for 2 weeks. Wow, I've now hit 200 different people with my prospecting. That's great. That makes me feel good. I'm doing the hard things that's required. I'm doing the work to get the leads that I'm going to need to get. So it's so important for us to track the progress. And so if we don't track the progress, then it's easy to feel lost and that we're not making the progress we need to make. And chances are, if you're doing the work every day, then you're going to improve. And that's where the nudges happen on breaking through those upper limits. Like I said at the beginning, it's not going to be a sledgehammer that breaks through and there's going to be a big shattering and now all of a sudden you're flying in the sky into the blue sky and clouds. It's going to be very incremental. It's the only way to see those incremental improvements is one, by doing the work every day, but by two, by tracking that progress. So those are my 5 strategies to help you train harder than you would race. So number 1, commit. Number 2, start easy. Number 3, find your place, places to do the work. Number 4, don't think, just do. And number 5, track your progress. So that's it. That's this episode. As always, thanks for listening. I want you to do more, be happy, surprise yourself, go farther. And if you haven't already subscribed or followed the show, please do. Please tell a friend or 10 about this episode. Forward this along if you think somebody needs a little nudge in their work. Let them know that you've been listening to this podcast and that you enjoyed this episode. And do appreciate you listening. We got a few more episodes left in this series, which I'm really excited about. I've already got them planned out, mapped out. That's all going to lead up to and conclude with the race that I'm doing in just a couple weeks' time. So thanks for listening. Do more, be happy, surprise yourself, go farther.